thank you very much for this opportunity to offer some context for what we've been experiencing today. And if I could just ask for a very loud round of applause for our organizer, for Walker, for bringing us all together today. This is a very difficult topic, and now layered on top of other experiences that we've had in Ukraine. I want to thank all of you, and I want to acknowledge that this is a very difficult day for all of us. And we will have time for questions from the audience as we move through the panel. So first, I'd like to just introduce myself one more time. My name is Adriana Helbig. I'm an ethnomusicologist, so I research the music of Ukraine with many experiences in the eastern parts, moving through the villages. I haven't met these babushkas, but there are many. They do take their moonshine seriously, and they always claim that it helps them sing better, so I've had a lot of recordings from them. So I will just add that when you are listening to popular music from Ukraine, especially from music that's been generated in the last few years, you'll note that a lot of young people really focus on the environment, and especially the ecocide that is happening during the war now. This is a theme that echoes back already from the Chernobyl era. So Darius, I'd like to ask if you could introduce yourself, and then Olya also offer a little bit more background, and then we'll start with the questions.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? My name is Lieutenant Darius Allman. I'm a HAZMAT and Fire Lieutenant for the City of Pittsburgh. I'm also the City of Pittsburgh Radiological Officer. As Michael said, I am also part of the Urban Search and Rescue for Pennsylvania Region 13. I've been to Chernobyl twice, once in October of 20 during the height of the pandemic, the second time during June of 2021. I had the experience of actually being able to go there for educational purposes. So whereas most people only get to go to the outside areas, I was inside of the reactor halls themselves. I was inside of the administrative building, in the control rooms, down in the basement levels. It was something I was very honored to be a part of, and something I will never forget. And I would also just like to say thank you for having me here, and I'm looking forward to today. Thank you.
Thank you, Darius. And Olya?
So my name is Olya Feldberg, and I am a researcher and sociologist. My area of expertise is collective memory and sociology of nuclear technology. Thank you so much for having me. I wish I could be there in person. I was living in Virginia really recently, and 2 weeks ago I moved to France, where I'm currently a postdoc researching the politics of nuclear fuel in Europe. Yeah, and I'm excited to be here. I just hope we can get the sound back.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so why don't we continue then where we picked off?
All right, the other side of this whole issue was the scientific side of things that also led to the humanitarian side of things. Part of what they had to do and how this whole incident occurred was they had to do a rundown safety test. Okay. They needed to figure out if the power station lost power, could the spinning down turbine that lost power create enough electricity to keep the water pumps running? The water pumps are needed to keep the core and the fuel cool enough so it doesn't melt down. They had to shut the reactor down, lower the power to X amount. What they did, they'd done it several hours before. Okay, then there was the power director for Kyiv said, no, you cannot increase the power anymore, you can't lower it anymore, it has to stay here. It stayed stagnant. It stayed too low for too long. They couldn't get the parameters needed, they ran the test anyway. All right, again, this is on the human side of things. On the design and mechanical way of things, that reactor was a terrible design. It was a bomb from the day it was built and put into service. It didn't have any of the safety factors and parameters that our commercial nuclear reactors have. In fact, if you look at the data and how things went down, Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, halfway across the state, happened almost the same way. Thing is, our reactors are built more robustly and have containment buildings. Our reactor buildings can withstand an airplane crashing into them at high speed. Theirs, over there at Chernobyl, it's just a gigantic open hall. Picture a building like this, okay, with 40-foot ceilings, but no containment. The reactor itself lies on the floor. We were walking across the reactor lid of reactor number 3. But there's nothing to contain any of it. None of the gases, none of the smoke, none of the graphite, nothing. So as soon as it exploded, it shot a 2 million pound lid roughly 100 feet in the air. The second explosion took the main body of the reactor, shot it about 80 feet in the air, rotated 90 degrees, and landed right back in its footprint. Theoretically, that can't happen here, thankfully. All right, so yes, that was a political, it was a man-made, it was, once the wheels started spinning on that night, there was no way to stop it.
Thanks for that. Olya, do we have you? Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, but I didn't hear the question.
Thank you. I'll actually ask the same question of you. Chernobyl is often framed as a technological disaster or political failure. What is the most useful lens through which we should understand Chernobyl today?
Thank you for this question. I think I want to maybe gently push back on the framing of choosing between the technological and political framing. Because I think the most useful framing for what Chernobyl can teach us today. There are many, many ways that we can interpret it and think of the kind of lessons of Chernobyl, but I think one of the biggest one is this entanglement of political and technological. And I think because the memory of Chernobyl and interpretation of what Chernobyl was and what are the implications for nuclear industry, for, different ways, even we can think of like political institutions and the transparency. All of this is different in different countries. Chernobyl had a very, very widespread effect, not even only obviously in Ukraine, but Belarus and in Russia, but in Western Europe and America as well. And I think it's an interesting question of why we would choose one or the other interpretation. If Chernobyl is read as a technological disaster only, or a man-made disaster, or like a operator mistake only, right? Versus the kind of more of an institutional failure, like what does it tell us? Or if Chernobyl is read as something that could only have happened in communism, what does this interpretation tell us? So yeah, I would say the most one of the useful framings, which I don't even know if it's a framing, is that it is both technological and political, and that most technologies have politics, and Chernobyl is just a very, extreme and tragic way to show it.
Thank you. For Darius, in an era of renewed nuclear energy debates and ongoing geopolitical tensions, what is the most important lesson Chernobyl offers for the present?
That was a one-off insofar as that the way things are designed now. Again, theoretically, nothing like that should be able to happen again, so long as the safeguards are there. I'm not saying it couldn't, but with the old ways, the old designs, the overwhelming majority of the power plants in that part of the world have become, so to speak, westernized. All right, they have a lot of the same protections that we have now. They use a lot of the same refined fuels, proper fuels. It did polarize the nuclear industry. because we were still 7 years removed from what happened at 3 Mile Island. All right, this country still hasn't come to grips with 3 Mile Island was not bad as people think it was. That's fact. All right, nobody died, and there's no evidence that there's an increased rate of cancer in that part of the country or part of the Commonwealth. But what we need to realize is that this was a one-off. It was a very cataclysmic one-off that has burned in the minds of people now 40 years later, and even in people who weren't alive 40 years ago. You can mention Chernobyl, and chances are somebody in their 20s or 30s will know about it. You can mention it along the same ways as Fukushima and 3 Mile Island. People are going to recognize it. But this was the one, I think, that just, it slowed down and pumped the brakes on the train for nuclear energy. And I think we all need to just take a step back and say, yes, this was a one-off. Could it happen again? A lot of things could happen. Could something like that in that exact way happen again? I don't think it could.
Thank you for that. For Olya, how does Chernobyl function as a site of political and cultural memory today, particularly in Ukraine and across the post-Soviet space?
So Chernobyl has many afterlives. I'm not a specialist in Ukrainian politics, although I know that both in Ukraine and in Belarus, that was a significant nation-building moment around the ecological movement post-Chernobyl. I know way more about Russian politics because that is my field, and in Russia, Chernobyl's memory is very weaponized, and I think in Russia, Chernobyl became this symbol of the failure, not the technological, not the expertise failure, but the failure of the Soviet project versus the West. So basically, the Soviet Union losing the Cold War. And I think for Putin's regime, this is very unsettling historical point that, a lot of now cultural production rethink in different ways. So, for example, there was a Russian show over 10 years ago on TV that created this kind of, that fantasized basically about Chernobyl happening in the US. It's like an alternative kind of past-future scenario where people travel back to the past, and a group of like Russian high schoolers basically managed to stop the Chernobyl, and instead, by some weird butterfly effect that happens in the US, and then the US becomes kind of like the disaggregated states of America, whatever, and the Soviet Union continues to exist. So that is one cultural phenomena that exists in Russian culture that I can talk about. Another one is definitely weaponizing as because Chernobyl was one of the few first points that Russia took take over when it started its horrible war in Ukraine. I think Russian propaganda really tries to make a case of, Western influence in Chernobyl and whatever, like Ukrainian Western agents trying to make Chernobyl into a dirty bomb. So it's a big point for Russian war propaganda as well currently. And then every country, as I said, has a very different memory of Chernobyl. It is known that in Germany, for example, it became really connected to anti-nuclear weapons and anti-nuclear energy movement, which kind of caused Germany to stop any kind of nuclear energy whatsoever. And in France, it became read more of a purely technological error and something that could only happen once, you know, and that really protected the nuclear industry in France. Yeah, and I think with HBO show in the US, it became that other part of narrative about non-transparency, you know, the government hiding the truth, that became again a very prominent, it's always been the prominent feature of this narrative, but I think especially with Trump presidency, that I think a lot of Americans maybe that watched that show made connections to Chernobyl. I think that's something that maybe in kind of Anglophone culture, I would say definitely HBO show is like the biggest cultural product. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think I'll ask you follow-up questions about the current war. In the meantime, I'll ask Darius if you could perhaps enlighten us on any significant long-term health or environmental consequences that we might continue to observe regarding Chernobyl.
In terms of biological, at the human level, nobody's going to know. You had 600,000+ people working the event in some way, shape, or form. Reactor operators, firemen, liquidators, military, pilots, miners, support personnel. Again, not to get or harp on the political side of things, but are you really going to keep track of 600,000+ people working in a remote area during that time of geopolitical stuff? Probably not, all right? I don't see too many young people. Is there anybody here that was not a child of the Cold War? Anybody born after the Cold War ended? All right, a couple of you, all right? Things were different back then. And most people can say, oh, it was just the Soviet Union that was lying. Oh, it was just the Eastern Bloc that was lying. No. Everybody was lying. Everybody was covering stuff up, keeping things from everybody else. The true biological side, on the human end of things, I don't think anybody will ever know. I would put my neck out on the line though and say that there were more than just 31 people who officially died from the incident. That is the number that is still out there. I believe it's like 30, 31, 33 as the official death toll. All right. Now, on the creature side of things, when we talk biologically, I was there October of 20, June of 21. The creatures are thriving. The plants are thriving. It looks like a jungle over there right now because nature has reclaimed itself. There are, what do we call, the dogs of Chernobyl. They're direct descendants of the pets that were left behind when we're only evacuating for 3 days. This is several generations of dogs later. The only thing that these dogs are really showing is they don't have a very long lifespan. Between about 3 to 5 years. All right, now, that's probably for a number of reasons. I don't know, I'm not a biologist, I'm not a genealogist, I couldn't tell you. But what I will say is that there is a program by a group called the Clean Futures Fund. What they do is they'll send dog food and set up veterinary clinics over there, and they have full, so they'll send veterinarians over there to go take care of the creatures. The plant workers are the ones that are taking care of these dogs day in, day out. They'll go out, they'll feed them, they'll interact with them, give them clean water. And the dogs are, my God, they're friendly. They just run up to you. And of course, our handlers are like, no, don't touch the dogs. And I look, I like, stop it, you cannot expect me. While this critter is coming up to me just saying hi, I'm not gonna pet the dog, come on. But what they're doing over there is that they're trying to humanely control the population. And that They're not over there culling the population. They're making sure that every female gives birth to a good, viable litter. And then they're fixing the female dogs. They don't want to cull them. They don't want to run them extinct. They just want to control it so it doesn't get out of control. A lot of things now, the wolf population is thriving. There's bears back in that part of the world that haven't been there for about 50 years. The moose and the elk population, and it's come full circle, is what it has. The Mother Earth has reclaimed herself and has reclaimed the area. As you can see from some of the pictures that Michael has taken, even some of the ones I've taken, even since the last time I was there, the main hotel that was in the center of town, there's a tree, probably about this big around, growing out of the corner of the roof. All right, the first time I was there, it was good. The second time I went there, that whole corner of the building had collapsed. All right, it's coming back. It's an anomaly that I don't have to tell you about, unless you. But it's proof that it can work, at least on the animal side. On the human side, I still don't see anything. What I was told was, if everything were to come full stop right now, if they could just take everything that went bad, snap their fingers, and it's stopped, right, and everything's contained, it would still take another 15,000 years of human intervention in the exclusion zone to get things back to where they had to be. And with some of the things that were released during the explosion, you might not see human habitation there for another 30,000 years. Are we going to be around in 30,000 years? We might not be around for another 30 months. Okay. But it's doing its thing over there, and it's amazing, actually. So.
Thank you. Olya, would you like to add anything to the health aspect of the question, or pick up on anything that Darius has just said?
Yeah, well, I agree with Darius that I also do not believe in whatever numbers, like the 31, whatever the official numbers seem insane. And I just wanted to say the health aspect is very contested, that has been brilliant work by historian Kate Brown, who wrote about this, about how it comes down to the measurements, you know, how do we measure the effects? What counts as what is a classified, because like, is it only cancer? What comes to like reproductive, system problems? Overall, just lots of things like headaches and other symptoms that's been ignored for so long. And just overall, is it whole body counters that are used? Is it the blood markers that are used? The system of evaluation of radiation effects, lots of things were established after Chernobyl. Even the idea of, is there a safe dose of radioactivity that, is there and what it is? And by looking at historical documents about Chernobyl in different countries, we can see how there wasn't a consensus of what a safe dose is. Right now, I think the consensus is that there isn't such a thing as a safe dose. But I mean, that's why talking about health and about how many people actually struggled is also a very contested story. Like, who is in charge of measuring it? What measures do we use? For example, if the system is set up in a way that everybody who suffered needs to get some kind of benefits from the state, we know, just to imagine Ukraine, Belarus, and even Russia in the 90s, none of these countries had institutional support to pay to everybody who suffered. Not even talking about the question of maybe Russia needs to pay like reparations, you know, to the people that suffered. Not even talking about that. But when you set up a system, you need to somehow, you know, thinking of repairing the harm people have suffered that affects the criteria that are used to you know, to select the populations that suffer. That kind of the sociological, I guess, part of that.
Thank you very much. Walker, I'm conscious of time. We have 8 minutes. Should I open it for question and answer, perhaps?
We can go a little bit longer.
We can go a little bit longer. Okay, thank you. So, Olya, I wanted to ask you about your expertise in cultural memory. We talked about the film Babushkas of Chernobyl. We watched that earlier today. So how has film, television, we saw a reference to a video game, tourism, how has all of this reshaped our understanding of Chernobyl?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there has been so much cultural production, both inside and mostly also outside the countries that suffered. And unfortunately, I think there has been a lot of cultural production around you know, dark tourism idea and making this, making like the pictures of Chernobyl into some kind of like dark aesthetic thing, you know, of just like especially now on the internet, but even before, things just become an aesthetic and kind of like void of meaning. And I think maybe because Chernobyl in cultural memory is so connected to the end of Cold War and to this idea of the end of the world that, you know, because, you know, for so long people lived in the fear of a nuclear war. And Chernobyl happened, and it's not nuclear war, but the imagery that it's produced, I think, became linked to this kind of post-apocalyptic images in culture, you know, especially in video games. It became such a thing for video games. If it's, you know, you need some kind of post-apocalyptic survival scenario, you know, you take the wheel and some of the pictures of Pripyat, you know, as a background for this kind of post-apocalyptic scenario. And yeah, and lots of, you know, Fallout is another game. There have been a couple of movies, I think also Hollywood movies, that kind of flirt with that aesthetic.
The HBO series.
Yeah,
the HBO series, I think that was also on Chernobyl. That was probably the more recent one as well.
Yeah, the HBO. Well, HBO, I think they did a better job. That it was actually on Chernobyl, and it was based on Chernobyl Diaries, the Belarusian writer, just like Alexievich, yes, who was a Nobel Prize winner. On her work, Chernobyl's Prayer, which she did oral history with residents of Pripyat and also the areas around in Ukraine and Belarus. So that's what Chernobyl HBO show, I think, was loosely based on. For like Soviet historians, there are still some inconsistencies in just the way, you know, especially how I would say people inside the system that are part of the show are genuinely every time surprised when, you know, they find that that people knew, you know, like, because, you know, Chernobyl's story is in a lot of ways an institutional story. Like they have been problems with that reactor before. Over, like people knew there were problems with this design, right? And in the show, you know, academics genuinely surprised, you know, like how we had no idea this is how the system works. And that for somebody who studied Soviet Union seems very implausible. Like if you made it to this kind of academic rank, you probably knew how the system works, and you probably knew what the, what intense pressure, production pressure, those reactors were made kind of like during. But it's a good show, I think. Overall, it stays, it borrows a lot from the Alexievich and the actual oral histories, even though it might be a little bit like Hollywoodized in its, in some of the ways people talk there.
Thank you. And if anybody's interested in more books, I would suggest Serhiy Plokhy's book on Chernobyl. Serhiy Plokhy's research on the Ukrainian war has been winning lots of awards and is readily available on Amazon. So Serhiy Plokhy, if anybody doesn't know, was leading the Harvard Ukraine Research Institute for many years. I'd like to bring this home a little bit, Darius, and ask about Pennsylvania, because we heard a lot about Japanese tourists coming to Chernobyl, and I was wondering if you could just shed some light on the role of Pennsylvania in this global discussion on nuclear energy.
Well, Pennsylvania, in the world of commercial nuclear power, we were the first ones. 3 Mile Island was the first one globally, and that the first one to get to that level changed it. Davis-Besse in Ohio suffered the same exact thing 18 months earlier. They caught it, we didn't. Right. So, going back to, okay, this is the U.S., we're a democracy, right? We talk with each other. Same thing happened. People with concerns were going back to the manufacturers and to the regulators and saying, hey, there's a problem. We found this problem. We can replicate the problem. You need to put it out there. They never put it out there. They changed some of the configurations of the control panels at 3 Mile Island, never told the operators, hey, we changed it up. One of the key indicator warning lights at 3 Mile Island was covered up by a work tag. They couldn't see the light blinking. That almost led to a catastrophic explosion of the reactor. All right? So there are parallels. We were the ones that started it off, and I think that it was the timing. And I don't in any way, shape, or form mean to minimize it, but ours happened in '79, theirs happened in '86. We were still trying to figure out no pun intended, the fallout of the situation that happened at a commercial nuclear reactor. Is it still safe? Of course it's still safe, but everybody was in the mindset of, oh my God, we're all gonna die. It was Jimmy Carter who had the whereabouts. He visited 3 Mile Island. He was part of the nuclear Navy. He knew all about reactors. He knew how everything worked. Where he messed up, he was so worried about what Congress and everybody was going to say. He could have just came out and said, listen, this was a one-off. This isn't nuclear holocaust. It's preventable, it's safe. He didn't. So I think that moving forward, here we are, how many years post 3 Mile Island, we're still having the same conversation, or lack of conversation. We're still in this mindset of, oh my God, it's the end of the world. It's not. If you look at all the options we have right now, nuclear is probably the best way for us to go, insofar that it is less dangerous in its refining methods. Far more people die every year in coal mining and gas and oil drilling accidents than they do in mining for uranium. All right, it's longer lasting, it's cleaner burning. Well, okay, nuclear waste, it lasts for tens of thousands of years. Well, yeah, it does. Naturally occurring uranium has a half-life of 4 billion years. The stuff we use in reactors, a couple 100 million years. So it's far less dangerous in the abstract, right? And the problem is, nobody wants to take the waste. There's a place out in Nevada that's been ready to go for the past 15 years, Yucca Mountain. They literally dug a hole inside of a mountain to bury all nuclear waste. Guess what they're not using? Yucca Mountain. Why? Because everybody's afraid of the nuclear waste. You built it inside of a mountain. It physically cannot come out of the mountain. It's safe from everything. It's safe from leaching out. It cannot get into the groundwater. What's a mountain? A giant chunk of rock. Can't get into the groundwater. In the event of an attack by a foreign entity, it can't be pierced. So I think that there's a lot of things that came into play, and we're still reeling from 1979 and 1986. And I talk to people, even when I teach, don't be afraid of it, just respect it. That's what it boils down to. Should you be worried about it? You should be worried about it if you get too close to it. You should be worried about what it can do to you biologically if you don't treat it with respect. But do we have to say, oh my God, it's a nuclear reactor, we're all going to die? No, we don't. We have to get out of that mindset. So, yeah, that's a plainly difficult question to ask because it can branch and spider off in so many directions.
Well, they pay me to ask difficult questions. So the last question will be for Olya. For the one thing that you would like this audience to remember about Chernobyl.
It's such a hard question. I think it's because Chernobyl is so many things, you know, and I think that is the most interesting thing about it. It is technical and it is political. I think maybe the main thing is, I would say that technology has politics, and building on all of what Darius just said, you know, the lesson of Chernobyl is do not build nuclear plants, but the lesson is thinking about the system that we have honest reporting, we have independent regulators, we have protection for technical experts, we have the procedure in place, you know, of consent of people that live around whatever it is, nuclear waste or nuclear plant, nuclear waste repository. That, you know, these are social things and these are political things, and that technology and politics exist together. And unfortunately, you know, technology can be weaponized, as we now see, especially with Russia attacking Ukrainian infrastructure, including its nuclear infrastructure. Yeah, I don't know if it's one thing about Chernobyl, it's probably not, but that would be my answer.
Thank you.
If you don't mind.
Absolutely.
I'd actually like to add on to that real quick. Here we are 40 years on, and humanity owes a debt that I don't think can ever be repaid to 600,000 people who walked into something they had no idea about, whether it was by choice or by force, and tried their hardest to stop and contain something they could not stop or contain. And we need to put the political aspects of it aside. We need to put the old way of thinking aside and realize that these 600,000 people truly were the ones that saved the world. And that needs to be, that's part of what really truly needs to be recognized and remembered throughout all of this. So with that, Geriam Slava.
Slava Ukraini. Thank you. Thank you to our panelists. And I'll just open this for one question each, perhaps for each panelist. Yes, which panelist would you like to ask the question to?
To both. But first, thank you very much. I think my takeaway from this fabulous panel and this entire event, thank you to everyone for organizing it, my takeaway would be that we as citizens should not stop talking about Chernobyl, not stop talking, because we have learned that there was a lot of information that was hidden, that was not revealed, that innocent people suffered. And I was really struck by the comment that Olga made about the contested number of injured, the deaths, and so on. But we know in Pittsburgh, in the immediacy of the event happening, that the community stood up. I'm thinking specifically of the Children of Chernobyl Fund, where it was recognized that young children were developing eye cataracts and requiring surgery, which our community raised funds to address. So I'm worried that as the memory fades, as the years march on, and people simply die of their injuries or the reproductive issues and so on, that people forget. And I think in the next panel that is organized, it would be really wonderful to have some members of the medical community addressing what were the learnings from these radiation doses and what were they able to do and what treatments were of any value and also for prevention purposes. I think that would be really valuable for all of us to just keep learning about what happened and not just having a commemorative event and being sad about it, but thinking what can we learn to go forward. Thank you, but thank you. So it's not really a question, I'm sorry, but I was very moved by both of your presentations. Thank you. Thank you.
That's okay. This is for Darius.
Yes.
Darius, my understanding, I might be wrong, that the Chernobyl reactors 1, 2, or 3, 1, 2, and 3 are still producing electricity.
No.
They're not.
No, the last one was turned off in 2005, I believe, 2003. Yes. Reactor 1, I believe it was, had another similar, almost catastrophic explosion. Number 2 was taken offline shortly afterwards. Number 3 was taken, they were using number 3 just to pretty much help power some of the suburbs while they were building a lot of the stuff going into place. That was my understanding. But there was a ceremony up in 2003, maybe 2005, somewhere around there, where they shut it off. It is no longer producing anything. In fact, as much fuel that they have been able to safely recover from reactors 1, 2, and 3 have already been recovered and put to safe storage. The fuel in reactor 4 that didn't get shot out into the atmosphere is still there. They can't get to it.
Okay, so segue to Zaporozhye, that nuclear plant. If the Russians, God forbid, successfully hit Zaporozhye, could it be another Chernobyl?
Yes, it could. But here's the thing. The misconception, as Olya said, is like we see pictures in video games of, oh my God, there was this giant mushroom cloud like a nuclear explosion. It's not going to be like a nuclear bomb going off. But what it would do is it would cast in the same way all the fuel out into the open area. So you wouldn't have a nuclear bomb, you would have a dirty bomb. It would be a radiological dispersal device, which has its own horrifying. Think of Chernobyl as the same way. There are thousands of square kilometers just covered in radioactive fallout and radioactive fuel particles and fuel fiends all over the place. The good thing is 40 years later, a lot of it has been buried due to erosion, due to wind blowing, due to rain. It's been pushed out and somewhat suppressed. If Zaporizhzhia were to get hit today, you would have to wait another 10, 15, 20, 30 years for that all to get buried under and pushed under. Hopefully that won't happen because the international community, I don't think, would allow that to happen. There would have to be consequences and repercussions.
The international community has allowed Putin to do this for 4 years already.
I understand.
There's a question in the back there. Would you like to, anybody else? One more question?
I wanted to comment that a Shahed drone had pierced the protective dome of Chernobyl. This was 2 years ago, and it did emit radiation. It was just on television Thursday night, where, again, they're patching that up. But again, Russians didn't care about sending a drone to pierce the protective dome. There's a picture right there in the corner. The other thing that Darius mentioned about the 600,000 liquidators, between 600,000 and 800,000, and each of them were awarded a medal. okay? Those medals are right there in the back there because I bought them just to show you because that's how they were honored. The one medal is representative of a drop of blood with the three atoms, which is the alpha, the beta, and the gamma, piercing the heart and the blood. So that's the medals right there that I wanted to bring to you so you could see how those heroes, like Darius mentioned, you know, were awarded. Yeah, some pensions or things like that, but they had to prove that it was not psychological. And that was the other way that the Soviet system then excluded those people that just had radiophobia, fear of radiation, where then it was psychological and said, no, you're okay, but it's your mind that's going crazy.
Thank you all very much. We'll turn it back over to Walker for the next phase of the afternoon. Thank you. Thank you again to our